and not be under his, like, God, it just doesn't sound as good as Jimmy does.
At 83, legendary drummer Jim Keltner, often called the drummer's drummer, has finally opened up about something he kept close to his heart for decades: the 7 guitarists who influenced him the most. During a quiet studio sit-down, Keltner reflected on the players who shaped his rhythms, challenged his creativity, and changed the way he listened to music. These aren't just great guitarists. They're musicians who pushed him further, inspired him deeply, and left permanent marks on his career. And today, for the first time, he reveals that list. 7 guitarists who stand above the rest. 7. George Harrison. Jim Keltner's memories of George Harrison go far beyond studio sessions. To him, George wasn't just a guitarist, he was a quiet force, someone who understood music on a deeper spiritual wavelength. Keltner often said that when George picked up a guitar, it felt less like performance and more like meditation. His touch was gentle, almost effortless, but it carried emotional power that few players could match. Keltner loved how George never tried to outshine anyone. He played what the song needed, not what his ego demanded. Whether it was a shimmering slide line or a subtle melodic phrase, George had a way of lifting the music without ever raising his voice. Keltner witnessed this magic countless times during the sessions for the Traveling Wilburys, where George's warmth set the tone for every recording. What struck Keltner most was George's humility. Despite being part of the biggest band on earth, he remained disarmingly human, thoughtful, and sincere. For Keltner, George Harrison wasn't just a great guitarist. He was the embodiment of musical grace, someone whose playing continues to echo in his heart decades later. 6. Cooder. There's a certain electricity Jim Keltner feels whenever he thinks about playing with Cooder. Ry wasn't just a guitarist, he was an explorer, a musical archaeologist digging through blues, folk, gospel, Tex-Mex, and global traditions. Keltner admired how Ry approached music with curiosity rather than ego. Every chord, every slide, every strange tuning felt like Ry was discovering something ancient and sacred. When they worked together, Keltner always sensed that Ry's guitar had a life of its own. The notes didn't just ring, they traveled, drifted, and told stories from forgotten corners of the world. Ry could move from a dusty Delta blues lick to a haunting slide melody that felt like it came from a distant desert. And Keltner, always a rhythmic storyteller himself, found that Ry pushed him to be more creative, more responsive, more alive behind the kit. What made Ry special, in Keltner's eyes, was his authenticity. There was never any showmanship, never any flash, just pure musical honesty. And that honesty made him one of the most influential and unforgettable guitarists Keltner ever encountered. 5. Eric Clapton. Jim Keltner has played with legends, but Eric Clapton left a distinct mark on him. Clapton's tone alone was enough to command attention, thick, warm, and unmistakably his. But what Keltner admired most wasn't just the technical mastery, it was Clapton's emotional depth. Every solo had a story, every bend carried pain, joy, longing, or memory. Keltner recalls sessions where Clapton barely spoke. He didn't need to. Once he plugged in, the guitar did all the talking. Keltner loved how Clapton balanced fire and restraint. He could unleash a flurry of blues fury or whisper a soft, soulful phrase that hung in the air like smoke. That balance made him unpredictable in the best way. To Keltner, Clapton was the definition of a musician who lived through his instrument. The blues wasn't just a genre to him. It was a language, a confession, a refuge. Watching Clapton play up close was like witnessing someone open a diary. And Keltner knew every time that he was in the presence of a guitarist who shaped entire generations. 4. Keith Richards. Jim Keltner always said that Keith Richards didn't just play guitar, he felt it in his bones. Keith had a rhythm unlike anyone else, a loose, swaggering heartbeat that defined rock and roll itself. And for a drummer like Keltner, Keith was a dream. His riffs weren't just chords, they were grooves, patterns that danced right alongside the drums. Keltner admired how Keith could make a simple two-chord progression feel monumental. There was a rawness, a grit, a rebellious spirit to everything he touched. Keith didn't chase perfection, he chased feeling. Sometimes his timing was behind the beat, sometimes ahead, but it always landed exactly where it was meant to. Working with Keith was unpredictable, but inspiring. Keltner once said that Keith's rhythm guitar was so powerful that it often felt like an entire band inside one player. The riffs weren't decorations, they were the engine, the fire, the pulse. For Keltner, Keith Richards was the living definition of rock and roll. Imperfect, dangerous, soulful, and completely unforgettable. 3. Jeff Beck. To Jim Keltner, Jeff Beck was a mystery wrapped in genius. Watching Beck play was like watching someone communicate in a language only he understood. His fingers, his whammy bar, even the volume knob, everything became part of his voice. Beck didn't play guitar, he sculpted sound. Keltner remembers the first time he heard Beck improvise in the studio. It was unpredictable, almost chaotic, yet somehow perfectly deliberate. Beck could move from a roaring rock phrase to a delicate whisper within one musical breath, bending notes in ways that didn't seem physically possible. What fascinated Keltner most was Beck's refusal to chase trends. While others were chasing hits, Beck was chasing innovation. He reinvented himself constantly, experimenting with jazz fusion, electronic textures, blues, and those expressive vocal-like melodies that became his signature. To Keltner, Jeff Beck was the guitarist who never stopped evolving. He was fearless, unrestrained, and endlessly creative. And Keltner felt lucky, deeply lucky, to have witnessed that kind of brilliance from only a few feet away. 2. Jimi Hendrix. Jim Keltner often said that Jimi Hendrix didn't change the guitar, he changed sound itself. Even decades after Hendrix's passing, Keltner still feels the shockwave of what Hendrix accomplished in such a short life. Hearing Hendrix for the first time was like hearing the future crash into the present. Keltner admired how Hendrix blended technical brilliance with raw emotional power. His solos felt cosmic, wild, unpredictable, yet deeply human. Hendrix wasn't afraid of noise, feedback, distortion. He embraced them, turned them into poetry. And Keltner loved the way Hendrix treated rhythm, loose, fluid, like a river constantly shifting direction. 1. Mark Knopfler. Jim Keltner places Mark Knopfler at number 1 for a reason. No guitarist ever affected him in quite the same way. Knopfler's playing felt effortless, graceful, almost liquid. The fingerstyle technique, the clean tone, the quiet confidence, it all created a voice unmistakably his. Keltner admired how Knopfler could make a simple melody speak louder than a wall of fast notes. Every phrase had intention, emotion, and space. Knopfler didn't just play guitar, he painted with it. Whether it was the moody storytelling of Brothers in Arms or the playful groove of Sultans of Swing, Knopfler made every song feel like a scene from a film. Keltner also loved Knopfler's humility. Despite being one of the most influential guitarists alive, he always carried himself with calm, quiet professionalism. No ego, no flash, just pure musicality. For Keltner, Mark Knopfler represents everything a musician should be: inventive, expressive, and true to his own voice. And that's why After 8 decades of working with the greatest players on Earth, Knopfler sits firmly at number 1. And there you have it, the 7 guitarists who left the deepest mark on Jim Keltner's life, career, and musical soul. After decades spent in studios with the biggest legends on Earth, Keltner has nothing left to prove, nothing left to chase, except the truth. And the truth is simple. These players shaped him. They challenged him. They inspired him. And in many ways, they helped define the very sound of modern rock and roll. If you enjoyed this deep dive into music history, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another documentary-style story. Because we've got plenty more legends to explore, and the next chapter is just around the corner.